Got it. Hello, everyone. This is Daniel Giamario, and I'm here with Lizzie Moon. And this is the monthly vlog cast, video blog, whatever phrase you want to use for that these days. And we're going to be covering, I think, a super important topic, which is the eclipse season of March 2025. And always, anytime we're investigating anything in the school right now, including so many of the highlight seminars that are coming up about the ingress of different outer planets into new signs, always must be seen within the context, a larger context, the larger story, which is that March happens to also be the end of the Kali Yuga and also nearing the end of what in our school is called the Great Turning, 1962 to 2034, which is when there's this convergence of so many different timelines. But now we know for certain how the precessional cycles line up with the Yuga cycles, and it has been suggested by the researchers on this, including Bibhudev Mishra, that it's actually the spring equinox, the March equinox, that is the very ending of that cycle. So that I'm only bringing this up because here we have this eclipse season that is within the eclipse season is the equinox and also the end of the Kali Yuga, all within this time frame. And also right at the end of this eclipse season framework is the heliacal rise of both Venus and Mercury in their new over stories. I mean, both showing up. Actually, neither Mercury will not be quite yet in his new overstory, but they are both rising in the morning sky around that, right near the end of it, during the the solar eclipse time in this eclipse season. So there's a lot to unpack regarding this time we're in right now. But this larger context, I think, helps us to see the importance of what we're going to be bringing up here today. Um, and so Lizzie has created a whole bunch of slides and marvelous resource for those of you who are taking this in and watching it later, watching it from the newsletter or at your own time. Many resources here. And I will say here that in the course of doing the research for this call, I've learned a number of new things and a number of new ways to explain the eclipse season itself. You want to put the first slide up so we have give the overview of what we're going to be doing today here regarding the eclipse season. The eclipses of March 2025, of which there are two, a total lunar eclipse and an almost total solar eclipse. And so we're going to be covering these issues, the center of the eclipse season, the dates, times, and degrees of these eclipses, the eclipse paths, some background on the Saros cycles, the Sabian symbols we'll discuss near the end. Also, we'll have a discussion about how to work with eclipses, ceremonial suggestions. And then we'll have some comments about what our school just loves eclipses, and we have things planned in 2026 and 2027 for future solar eclipses. All right, so I want to start off here by saying that for years and years, we've had a rather large emphasis placed in the school about the eclipse season. I actually became quite interested in this way back in the 1980s, where I came upon an extremely interesting section in one of Guy Otwell's publications, where he was saying that the Sumerians were a culture that determined how old you were, not by your solar years, but by how many eclipse seasons you had experienced. And so, in other words, if you were, oh, I mean, I just recently turned 76. Well, then in Sumerian ease, I would be, what would that be? I'd be double that, you know. So this would actually be, um, I would be now turning 153, going into my 153 third eclipse season. You know, so that got me thinking, what about these eclipse seasons? Now, it turns out that there are two of them every year, and they are separated by 173.3 days. And it's because of this 6 months apart, which is why we've actually used the 6-month initiatory window for nodal transits, which makes a lot of sense, particularly when you look at the movement of the nodes relative to Jupiter and Saturn and so on. So um, uh, it's right in that zone of an initiation cycle that's about that length. But it wasn't until doing the research on this call, I had never really understood what it meant, the center of the eclipse season, because it turns out that throughout long periods of time, the astronomers have said the eclipse season is 31 to 38 days long. And how that is measured off is from a certain point, which we will look at the chart of. The exact point of the center of an eclipse season is when the sun is exactly aligned with the north node. And so then you can have the possibility of 3 eclipses, but usually only 2. You know, so here we have the chart. We can illustrate this thing I'm bringing up. March 17th, 2025, 2 days after the Ides of March, just a few days before the equinox, we have the center of this eclipse season. Why? Well, look at the north node and look at the sun. 27, 23 Pisces. You know, of course, the sun is moving about a degree a day, and so it's only on that day that's why they call it the center of the eclipse season. And you cannot have an eclipse if the sun or the moon is more than about 12 degrees away from this point. And so that's why we have only 2 eclipses. Actually, both eclipse seasons in 2025 only have 2 eclipses each. But there are other years, just based upon where the center point is, you could have 3. You know, two lunars and lunar eclipses and a solar. You know, but that's not going to happen this year. So about 16 days on either side of March 17th is the eclipse season. So it's certainly covering all of March and leading up really absolutely to the time period of the heliacal rise of Venus, and probably extending for a couple of days, the first couple of days in April. And encompasses the 2 eclipses that we're going to be speaking of here, the total lunar eclipse and a nearly full total solar eclipse. So let's turn our attention to the one that's coming up shortly, the lunar eclipse, total lunar eclipse. And this is a south node eclipse. And then you can see that some of the data here, sun and the moon at 2356 Virgo, the sun at 2356 Pisces. And I've always liked to point out that for a full moon, and of course the lunar eclipse happens at a full moon, can only happen at a full moon, that you have to not just pay attention to where the moon is, but also where the sun is, because it's a resonant polarity between those two. It's a magnitude 1.1804, and that's the point. The 0.1804 is the amount beyond the sun and the moon being right exactly in opposition. And so basically, this is not as large as long a total eclipse as possible, but it's still a very long one. And you can see the information here: duration of totality, 1 hour, 5 minutes. Um, the so I had my on my notes here somewhere the maximum in during this season, this not season, the Saros, this family. We'll get to the Saros information in a couple of minutes. The longest was December 27th, 1898, and that was a 1.3777, and it had 89.9 minutes of totality. And so it could actually be longer than this one, but this one is definitely long enough to make, it's stunning if you an opportunity to be with the whole cycle of the moon, from full, diminishing down to no moon, and then increasing back up to full moon in the space of 6 hours and 3 minutes with that totality. And what's very interesting about this eclipse is that it's centered in the darkness of it, that where the total eclipse will be experienced is only going to be on half the Earth. Half the Earth is going to be in the sunlight, and half the Earth will be during the night. And this one is centered beautifully, well, strongly on North America and South America. The Americas are getting this one directly. And we'll see one of the more remarkable discoveries, and something that's not normally looked at except by eclipse junkies, which is how the pattern of the Saros actually happens. And in fact, I want to just mention something about this right now. The moon, the cycles of the moon is very, if you looked at all of them, it is a vast and complex subject. And what it is that we have used exclusively up to this point is a foundational element in our school would be the nodal returns and the metonic cycles, 18.6 and 19. The metonic is when the sun-moon angle is the same at your birthday. And then the 18.6 is the cycle of the nodes, whether it's the nodal return or the nodal reversal. But in between 18 and 19 years, there's also the really important eclipse cycles. 18 years, 11 days, and some hours. So there's 3 really important cycles between 18 and 19. And it turns out that these eclipses run in families. So I think before we go to the March 29th, let's look at the Saros information. Let's look at the chart first. That's great. So 11:30. This is here we go. 11:55 p.m. March 13th. Of course, in many parts of the world it'll be March 14th. But this is calculated for San Francisco. So this is don't forget, when you look at a chart like this, the angles are going to be different depending on where you are on the planet. But the other portions of it are going to be true wherever you are. And so you can see the sun and the moon there, and you can see that the moon is only about less than 4 degrees from the south node. So the moon is with the south node, making this a south node eclipse. And it turns out that the entire family, the Saros family of for this one, every one of them is south node. So basically, when this particular Saros happens, which is numbered 123, it's always at the south node. Now, let me just bring up something about that. I've always felt that there is a difference between a south node eclipse and a north node eclipse. Because in our understanding of it, and it's certainly not just our school that thinks this way, the south node is from the past, and the north node is the directional flow going toward the future. Now, that's not to be considered in a dualistic sense, one is good or one is bad. It's just one is associated with lineage, the past, what has happened in the past. Now, it turns out every eclipse, even north node eclipses, and the solar eclipse is a north node one that we'll be looking at here in a bit, they all are associated with the issue of shadow. Whether your chart is connected to these degrees or not, from a global perspective, there's always the necessity to look at the shadow material of these signs, okay? However, if it's the south node and the moon, then there's even more importance of looking at the shadow material of what has happened in the past. And so to have this one show up just before the exact point of the eclipse season itself, but then also that it's just a few days before that equinox point we talked about, and just a day before the Ides of March, you know, there's so much imagery that is associated potentially there with quote shadow. Now, what do we mean by shadow? That which is not integrated, that which is not recognized by our awareness, by our consciousness. Not necessarily saying shadow is evil or anything, but it's like something which is running us that we may not be aware of. And in other conversations, in other topics over the last few years, we've looked at the, you know, the shadow material on the United States chart and the Chiron return of the US, the Pluto return of the US, and on and on and on. And those things are still happening. In fact, the exact point of the Chiron return, the fifth Chiron return, is still to come here. I think we have that chart in here. That I don't know if we put that one in here.
Not yet, but I can find it real quick.
I think I don't have it here, so I looked at that.
I can find it real quick.
Yeah, it's not long from now. I mean, because you can see here on this March 13th lunar eclipse chart that there you have Chiron at 2117. Actually, maybe.
Yeah, the U.S. Chiron is at 2008 Aries.
Oh, okay, so it's the conjunction's already happened. I forgot about that. Anyway, we're certainly in that window of that fifth Chiron return that's going to go on for a bit, and we're going to be talking later in this conversation about the Chiron Eris relationship. But you can even, we don't see that on this chart right here, but we do have one to look at here coming up, which I think is this eclipse season is alerting us to back to 1971 and what's going to happen this summer, leading up just before this summer. The other thing I wanted to mention while we're looking at the total lunar eclipse chart, in working with lunar eclipses for so long, and I just want to throw this out as a possibility, and I'm loving to get feedback on this from people who work these eclipses, is that I think there's a marked difference between whether or not you're on the side of the Earth where the lunar eclipse happens at night, or where you would actually see the moon disappearing and you would see the orange-red moon, or whether you're on the side of the Earth where you're in bright sunlight. Because if you're on the side of the Earth with bright sunlight, there really is no shadow, because that whole shadow thing is happening on the other side of the Earth. There's nothing being blocked out at all. So I think that makes a huge difference. Now here we're looking at the pathway, or this is the part of the planet that will see and be in the total lunar eclipse. And you can see right direct bullseye is there, the United States of America and Canada. Now, one of the things that is not mentioned enough, and quite frankly, I've only learned about this in the last 4 or 5 years, actually, is that when you have the Saros family, which lasts for over 1,200 years, that each fourth eclipse will cover the same part of the Earth. And in fact, we're looking at the one coming up here shortly. We're looking at this path. This is where it's happening. But then if we go back to February 9th, 1971, Saros 123, the same Saros family, let's look at the pathway. Virtually identical. Now from there are two that would have happened after 1971 that would be different parts of the Earth that are direct bullseye in the darkness. So 1971 is really similar to 2025, as you can readily see, and you'll have these charts. You'll have these resources when you go back over this again. And you'll see US, you'll see Canada, and even Greenland they're in the picture, as well as a partial lunar. It would be seen for both of them in Western Europe. So I think that's kind of really interesting about how that pattern operates. Can you quickly, before we look at the solar eclipse, look at that Saros data that you created? Now,
So this is the general information about Saros cycles.
Right. This one, yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
You want to read through it?
Yeah, so each eclipse that belongs to a Saros, and they're different words, cycles, series. You just mentioned it, the whole very long Saros cycle. But within that, each eclipse belongs to a series, and then that series produces an eclipse every, here we go, 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours. And how many days that is. So, and then in the way they, I have another slide that talks about why they start, when and where they start, and then how this series of eclipses basically crawls across the Earth and then returns back. And every time they'll be 10 or 11 degrees further along the zodiacal latitude as they crawl along the Earth and come back. And so this is what we're talking about, the two eclipses separated by a period of one Saros, which would be back to 1971, share a very similar geometry as they occur at the same node, at nearly the same distance from Earth and at the same time of year, due to the 3 harmonic cycles of the moon's orbit. So it's useful to organizing these Saros into families, typo there. But each one of these families lasts 12 to 15 centuries. That's what I'm talking about, the family with the series within those families. And then they follow a pattern. Each one, the cycle follows this pattern of a number of penumbral lunar eclipses to partial to total, back to partial. And that's because of the way they're crawling across the latitudes of the Earth. And then each eclipse of a given Saros expresses the energy of the original eclipse of that series. So we're going back to 1971, but I'll show you interestingly where this family began way back centuries ago, and we even cast a chart for that. So at a given time, because of the way each series starts, there can be 42 series going on to, or about 42 series going on at one time. So it's not like they're linear. We do one and then we do the next. They're all happening at once, or a lot of them. And then how they're numbered. And you mentioned the 123. So for lunar eclipses, the even numbers indicate the sun is nearing the descending node, and odd numbers indicate the sun is nearing the ascending node, but opposite for the solar. So that's how you can kind of tell which number you're in and how it's what it would be, either a south node or north node eclipse. And so then I'll include in here one of the resources I found, which really describes why and how they start, when and where they start. And each series starts as a tiny partial eclipse at either the north or the south pole. And so that's why each eclipse kind of, as it descends 10 or 11 degrees down the latitude, the zodiacal latitude, then it comes back up to the pole, opposite pole from where it started. So I'll include this, but after approximately 650 years, the eclipses of the series will occur conjunct the nodal axis and then continue on their journey.
Right.
Yeah, so that was a great explanation of kind of how they work, and I'll include the link to this resource in the show notes. And so
it was actually the work of Bernadette Brady, who's worked a lot on this stuff a lot. It was her suggestion that I first became aware of running a chart for the very first one.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, she was the one who was suggesting that, and you know, so like I think you ran the charts, but here let's look at this for a moment
Yes.
before we go there. So here, this is giving you some information about Saros 123, and we're talking here now about the lunar eclipse. So it started in 1087 and lasts 1280 years, right? And February, and then we put these in here because this is showing that very interesting pattern of where when you get to the third one after the one we're looking at, like the pathway, the portion of the Earth covered by the one in 1971 is the same one as in 2025. And this is what made me think back to 1971 as being extremely important. And in fact, just as an example, 1971, it was in January of 1971 that the World Economic Forum started. It was also the time period in 1971 when the entire financial system of the planet shifted. It's when the U.S. went off the gold standard, and it was only the second time in U.S. history that the dollar was devalued. There was also this major Silmar earthquake, 6.7 in Los Angeles, that killed about 60, 70 people. Also, it's when the Pentagon Papers were revealed and released. And there's a bunch of other really powerful things happened. But I also wanted to mention whether I guess you could say this is an important event that happened in 71 for things we'll talk about a little bit later in our conversation. It's also when Elon Musk was born in 1971. And we will have a discussion about Eris and Chiron conjunctions here coming up. But I put on here the data, and you can see how it moves from 20 Leo to 1 Virgo to what is this?
Oops, I forgot I didn't put the date in there. Sorry, I mean the degree in there. Sorry about that.
I wrote that down over here somewhere. Anyway, just increase. You can see how it's increasing, and then we have March 25th, 2025, 23 Virgo. And it's number 53 out of 72 total eclipses in that family, lasting 1280 years. And we've already shared what the pathways are from 1971, 2025. So let's turn our attention now to the solar eclipse. And I have the dates on here of the same thing, because so here we have Saros 149, which also takes us back to 1971 in the pattern here. So here's the March 29th partial solar eclipse, and this one's almost total. It's 93% of the sun is covered by the moon. Um, and here with the one thing, one of the things we discovered, um, um, I considered this a few weeks ago when we had our Venus call. When you look at the Sabian symbols or the Chandra symbols, you know, the whole systems that have to do with coming up with imagery for each degree, it turns out that it's actually 90006, 90023. You know, in other words, it's beyond 9. So therefore, what you have to use, according to the way the protocol is of using those degrees, is use the 10th. So we made the mistake in our call last week on the Venus group to use 9, but we had a chance to check that out, and it's actually 10, which is the magic degree for this eclipse. Now, you can see some of the other features of it. Um, Look at the distance between the node and the moon. So now you see they're not quite, it's not quite as close. It's about 12-degree separation, which is why you do not have a complete total one. I believe the statistics on this one, um, again, if you just notice this, you say, "Oh my God, look at Pluto conjunct the ascendant." That that's San Francisco. You know that you could be in New York and it's different. Europe would be different. However, I do find it intriguing considering all the work we've done in the last few years on the quote shadow of Aquarius, that here the Pluto is with the ascendant at this particular eclipse in Silicon Valley. Okay, which is a very, very interesting thing to note. And you can see the other ingredients of that chart. Do notice whether you have any individual on your own individual chart, any degrees that are close to the phenomena here. And you can look at the other stuff that's happening. I mean, what a powerful time period that is. There you have Venus that is just rising. It's now 11 degrees separate from the sun, just rising. Heliacal rise of Venus with the North Node. Saturn has just been rising. It's about a 15, look, it's only about 15 degrees. And so that's just when Saturn is rising from the underworld. And then there's Mercury. Soon it's just still a little bit too close to the sun, but just about also to begin its new overstory, which will be the Pisces overstory. So we have the Venus Pisces overstory, and we have the Mercury Pisces overstory at the same time as, yes, a North Node eclipse, right? So to me, there's more punching through to the new, punching through to visionary possibilities, because any, you know, it's like a super new moon. And I mean the old way of thinking of that, not the way that in the last several decades, super meaning big. No, this is basically a super new moon because it's a new moon happening in eclipse season. You know, so at the very least, it is the seed point for the next 6 months. And some might say it's the seed point for as much as 2 or 3 years. That's something that many astrologers speculate on. You know, what is the actual time frame of uh, the intention of that eclipse? You know, what is it bringing out and for how long? Um, but considering this is happening with the heliacal rise of Venus, and a North Node one, I think this one bears a great deal of potential for envisioning the future we want. Because that's less shadow, I guess you could say. However, let's take a look at the pathway. The paths of the 1971 and the one that's happening here in a few weeks. So remember now, this is almost a total. But the totality, where it's strongest, 93% of the sun, is up there in Greenland and up there in that far north part of Canada, down to portions of Canada that are like, what is that, Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, you know, that area there, New Brunswick of Canada. But you can see the partial goes all the way over there to Western Europe. And that's the pathway now. And just consider all the stuff in the news right now, you know, uh, the turmoil in Western Europe. This technate dream of the U.S. is going to take Greenland and Canada. I really take seriously the pathway of these things, you know, and it's giving us clues both from the past and looking toward the future. And so let's look at the one in 1971, and you can see the how these patterns have a certain match. So here's the one in 1971. Also hits Greenland, Western Europe, big time. And that one was a little bit less of a total, because this, in fact, this particular Saros started more recently. So there we have the fullest part of the eclipse happening over the UK, Iceland, Norway, Greenland, down actually to the area where we're going to have an eclipse event in 2026, right there in that area of Spain. We're going to be having an event there in 2026 for a solar eclipse. Different Saros, different Saros. Um, and so let's look at the data there. There's more data on this particular thing we need to look at. So we've looked at there's the 1971 one at 6 Pisces, 7 if you use the degrees. And here you can see that the sun and the nodes are about 13 degrees apart, therefore partial, not total. Many other things one can discern from that. I'm just really in the beginning of this deeper research about how 1971 relates to 2025, and I think there's a lot of clues that we can come up with by going back to 1971 and related to now, because we're in the midst in 2025 also for a completely different world global economic system, actually. Happened in 1971. I thought of this other thing that happened in 1971. It was the release of the very first microprocessing computer. And so here now we have the version of the great oxymoron, artificial intelligence, as if anything artificial can be intelligent. So basically, we have this the singularity point coming up of where general artificial intelligence goes mainline, you know, and there's so much stuff about the AI algorithm takeover of the planet right now, and so that takes us back to what was seeded back with the World Economic Forum in 1971, and the first microprocessing processor came out in 1971. And who knows what might be happening with the earthquakes, right? I mean, there was a major LA earthquake that happened in 1971. It was also, of course, when the Vietnam War, there was like massive peace protests happening. 500,000 people in several places, all over the world, actually protesting the Vietnam War. And Nixon was still president at that point, and they were bombing the crap out of Laos and Cambodia. You know, the secret bombings there and everything. And that is also when Kissinger was the protege with Klaus Schwab. You know, when they were together at I think Yale is what it was, and where the whole WEF dream came together. Okay, so I think you had another slide there with some other data about this particular Saros 149. Yes. So this one started in 1664, and it's 1,262 years long. And there's the information about the pattern of four, where 1971 resembles 2025 as far as where the path on the Earth is. And 1989, 2007, 1989 was also quite an important year for so many reasons. That's the part of research and sharing for another time. But hopefully, you that are all watching this and who are more seasoned astrologers or have been really into eclipses, here's the research prompt, to take this further in your research. But now, this very unique thing is that Lizzie, when she was preparing for us getting together today, did the original research as suggested by Bernadette Brady to come up with the charts of the very first eclipse in the sequence, in the series, in the family. So here's the beginning of the current total lunar eclipse that we're now experiencing. It started all the way back in 1087. Now, since that was happening, it was at, I think, the South Pole, right? Since it's the South Node one, I think so. Anyway, um, what Lizzie has done here is cast it. You have to cast it for a location, right? So she put in Greenwich, the current prime meridian on the planet. What I've been actually playing around with here is to use this data and relocate it to where you were born in the current life, and try that one out. And then you can relate that original chart to your current chart. That's another way you could look at this.
I'll say real quick, Daniel, because I can't help but notice on this chart that there's that Uranus-Pluto combination, but in Pisces. And I was born with that, but in Virgo. Almost exactly
Yeah,
opposite.
you can't help at all to notice that one. That's for sure. Yeah, these are the kind of interesting insights. I've come up with some rather remarkable things. I ran the one for Lynn's, the one that began the sequence of her prenatal eclipse, and the one for myself, and there was that magic 4-degree thing of the 4 degrees in Virgo thing. It was right there. Like you could see the connections really between our two charts by going back to the first eclipse in our own Saros, our own personal Saros, because our own personal Saros is the lunar, it's the solar eclipse before we're born. So that's a whole other thing to relate it to, actually. So this is going back to what starts. This is the beginning of the Saros that is this eclipse season. So it may actually not be the one that's related to your own, unless this Saros was the one of the eclipse, the eclipse, the solar eclipse before you were born.
Right. Okay. Okay, so that's the 123 from
Well,
1087.
that's certainly giving us clues there. It has the Uranus-Pluto signature, uh, and it's also very interesting, isn't it, that it's that Moon-Sun opposition in 28, almost 29 Leo, and well, that reminds me of the chart of the current president, 29 Leo rising. And Jupiter in Gemini, and we're at Jupiter in Gemini time right now. And so there's that pattern there that we find. And I'm sure you can come up with many other interesting things from this. I'm looking at how it relates to the US chart also, which of course it does. So let's look at the one that begins the solar eclipse.
There's another Leo signature here too.
Oh my God, isn't that incredible? And so this is the start. This was 1664. And again, for Greenwich, so this Greenwich is Libra rising, but can also try it for um, other locations. If this happens to be the Saros that is your own Saros, then run it for where you're born in the current life. Yeah, that relationship, between that 28 Leo showing up on both of them is pretty wild. What a fantastic discovery here, we're just learning as we're speaking here, and as we did the research for this call. And I thought it was important to go into a lot of this, considering the importance of the eclipse season that we're in, based on what we mentioned before, that it's part of the uh, great turning, fourth turning, fourth turning for the U.S. and Europe, and also the end of Kali Yuga and all those things. So, as we will soon have to wrap this up, I thought it would be important. What else do you have on the slide? So what did we miss?
We have the Eris-Chiron.
Yeah, yeah. Now I want to give a shout out to Eric Coppolino, who has been putting a lot of attention on the relationship between Chiron and Eris. His view of Eris is a little bit different than mine, but I think pointing this out, that we're going to have this Eris Chiron conjunction May 17th, and you have to go back to 1971 to have the previous Eris Chiron conjunction. And to me, it's totally related to the article that I wrote in last month's newsletter, the Ramblings article called "Out of Chaos Order," but how, by what means? And so that's the speculation about what kind of chaos do you want? Do you want the chaos that is necessary for new creations, natural chaos, or is it something that you have intentionally you have individuals who want to intentionally create chaos? And then you might even speculate, Eris herself, was she simply an agent of the big change that was happening in that time period in history, which was the end of the matriarchal culture of Anatolia and the taking over by the Zeus patriarchal cults? But that was happening all over the planet anyway at that time period. Was she an agent of that natural shifting of the ages that was happening then? Or was she just a troublemaker? And I don't have an answer to that. However, I'll give you one example regarding the fourth turning. Um, there is a person that some people who follow the politics might have heard of, Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon had read the fourth turning, and back in the first Trump administration, he said, "Oh, this is great because we know the fourth turning is upon us. We want to make sure the chaos that happens is directed in the direction that we want to take it." Right? So they knew it was coming, and they wanted to help bring about a certain uh, number of events. But what's really interesting is that in the last month, Bannon has become one of the main critics of Elon Musk and Donald Trump. That's not what they had in mind before. Did not have in mind a technocratic takeover by billionaire oligarchs that they're going to set up their own version of top-down control of some sort of fake globalism that is just an inversion of what it could really be. So I'm just throwing that out there because we'll find out. I mean, April, May, June, before Jupiter moves into Cancer, and after the final point at the end of Kali Yuga, according to Bibu and those that understand the yugas, the end of Kali Yuga doesn't mean we go into a golden age. it, it actually means there's more composting, more conflagration that happens at that point. Because the whole point of the end of Kali Yuga is the ending of materialism. Now, what is it going to take to end materialism? There's a lot that needs to be composted, including AI, including technocratic global top-down control. So anyway, that's just giving you my opinion on this, but we shall see. We shall see. And it's coming
There's,
April, May, June. And if you can look at the history of 1971 and relate it to a higher octave of that, here we are. And so that's the Eris. Go ahead, Lizzie.
I was just gonna say there's so much to say about that, and it's kind of I don't know. I keep hearing the term bait and switch, because again the cheerleaders for new leader in our steering the ship, I guess, or the many of them, the army. What do they call it? The PayPal mafia, the mafia. Anyway,
Yes.
steering the ship. Um, now have the ones supporting them going, oh, whoa, wait a minute, we didn't
Right.
bargain for this. So as we were kind of trying to say, and it's interesting, some of the Sabian symbols and zodiac degrees that I've included as some of the research, the resources speak to that. Like, what are you standing for? It's time to stand for or against or whatever, but out loud and publicly, and you know, like you said, here we are. So
I mean, Chiron and Aries is basically, according, and I've got this insight from one of my colleagues, Dale O'Brien, and I agree with him entirely, that the new Aries is coming from Chiron is the actional stance. I do not comply. I do
yeah,
not comply with that which violates my autonomy and sovereignty and pure humanness. You know,
yes.
that's the stance. And Eris, what is her part going to be here? We shall see.
Well,
Um,
now that you're speaking of this, I will try to include that star degree or that Sabian symbol for that degree as well, in the resources. I think it would be interesting.
um, I will include in the resources here the Sabian symbols. We don't have really time in our presentation today to talk about each one of them. I just wanted to maybe add one more thing about how to be with these eclipses.
I have this one chart that you want included just to speak on here because
Yeah. So you can see there, you put it in there. Eris is right with Chiron at 13, 14 Aries, right? And you can see the other stuff about this guy's chart is a Mars and Aqua conjunct the North Node at 15 Aquarius. Um, Probably the most extreme example of a technocrat chart that would exist. Anyway,
like the disruptor. Okay, so I will stop the share now, and then you'll just see that we have all the Sabian symbols here that you'll get as your resources. So,
I like that silver trident one.
yeah.
Right. So with a lunar eclipse, and this would certainly apply to all of those of you in North and South America, you have 6 hours to do really big ceremony, and it's lasting pretty much all night, depending on where you are, whether East Coast or West Coast. And the way I like to work it is that during the time period when the full moon is shrinking down to totality, that is the time period to honestly address, and you can be in a group or you can do it individually, where the shadow material is, whether you can relate to it in your own life or not. Your chart may not be on the front lines with it, but that doesn't mean you're out of the picture as far as what's happened on the planet. So it's to actually call out and address where the hidden stuff is, where the shadow material is. And then during the dark time, during the totality time period, that's a transmission point. I'm not really suggesting in the way we've worked ceremony on this to do anything but just be open and receive, or maybe journal or meditate, or just be in a receiving place, because that's the portal. That's the portal. And then as the moon starts coming back, as it's moving more and more and more toward fullness, you can share as the new, because you're going to see that first little crescent, as the moon starts coming back. Think of that as the new moon point, the seed point for either the next 6 months or the next 2 or 3 years, or forever long you want to project. And then you're creating your visions. You're creating your visions for um, the full illumination, we could say, that would happen at that point, because there you have the full moon back, so that you can see the shadows of night, but you actually then have the polarity between the sun and the moon operating with each other, the Virgo Pisces. Then near the end of that, that's party, celebration, eat. That's just to get together with friends and have a good time. But as the moon is coming back to its fullness, these are just suggestions. Those of you who work eclipses may have your own way of doing it. And then for the solar eclipse, you can actually, if you have the right lenses to look at the sun with, you can do pretty much the same thing leading up to the time period of the conjunction. Now, it's never going to be totality, so you don't actually get to a visible portal, right? But you're all still seeing how the sun is diminishing and diminishing and diminishing somewhat. And depending on where you are, if you happen to be in the track of it, then it gets almost completely total. And then it starts coming back. It's a shorter time period to work with it, but it's still useful. And then in the same way as the sun is coming back, that's the time period to share the visions, to project into the future. The seed point is very, very powerful again for the next 6 months, the next 2 or 3 years. But it's a seed point based on a new moon, right? Because it's a super new moon. Well, the full moon eclipse is full moon. It's the resonant polarity between those two signs. Wow. Okay. I think we've taken this one probably as long as we can take it. Go ahead, Lizzie. You jump in.
I just have a question, because you did mention that it would be that the experience, of course, is different for people, whether they're on the light side of the earth or the dark side of the earth. However, I assume that the ceremony or working with it would be the same.
It would
Am
be
I
the
right?
same.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I think that's very helpful to give people like real, literal steps, this
Yeah.
and that, and this and that, if they're not so used to working with it. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, and if you're not in the path of the solar eclipse, you can just still, whether on time and date or like other different sites, this is when it starts. You can do your certain kind of tuning in, looking at the shadow material before the point of where it's close, to the new moon point, and then that's kind of the portal then. And then as it moves past the conjunction, then that's when you're seeding, the next 6 months, the next 2 or 3 years. Remember, that's a north node then, so it's a punch through into the new at that point.
Yes. And I will just mention that on timeanddate.com for the March 13th eclipse, they are doing a live stream. So if you're not somewhere you can see it, you can watch it on there.
That's a great suggestion. That is definitely another way this can be worked with. So, okay, that was a lot to cover in this amount of time, and it's been such a pleasure doing this together with you, because you had the opportunity to really take this on as a learning project together with me. I learned a lot from this too. So, and Gemini, Brett, and myself are going to be taking this deeper in Oracle. We still have room for more people for our Oracle All School gathering, so you might want to consider if any of this really has fascinated you about eclipses. We're going to be going into the lunar standstill. We're going to be talking about prenatal eclipses. All the stuff that we started to touch on here will be gone into in much greater depth when we're together next month.
Yes, we have a few more spaces left, and we also have Equinox seminars coming up this month. So, yeah, thank you for taking me down the educational path. It was on my list to learn about the Saros cycle, so I have a better understanding now. So,
Well,
really
me too. The collaboration makes it happen. So I appreciate it very much. And until next time, I'll talk to you soon. Right? Okay.
okay. Thanks, everybody.